بالله من الشيطان اللعين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبو القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. So this will be our first Nahjul Balagha discussion, inshallah. I have sent a link into the chat into the Zoom chat to the book that I plan on using and that we can all follow along with, which is the book Glimpses of Nahjul Balagha by the late Shaykh Murtudha Mutahhari. The first thing that is very important before engaging in any kind of study, especially an Islamic study, is that a person has to have a correct intention and a correct perspective. Our goal should always be to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And learning things just for the sake of learning them will deter us from that goal. It's important that we always approach any book or any subject matter with sincere intention and an open mind. It's important not to go into things with a prejudice or a preconceived conclusion. And this is one of the secrets that leads to ma'rifah, or that is the deep, true meanings that are found in Islam, in the Quran, and in works like Nahjul Balagha. Nahjul Balagha, the Peak of Eloquence, is a compilation of sermons, letters, and short sayings of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abu Talib alayhi salam. And this was a work that was largely compiled for its literary value. And inshallah, we will talk about the compiler and a little bit of the history of Nahjul Balagha and give a cursory overview of Nahjul Balagha. The reason I thought it would be beneficial to go with the work of the late Shaykh Murtudha Mutahhari is because it is an overview, a summary, a glimpse into Nahjul Balagha. Nahjul Balagha is an ocean, and people have to understand the source of that ocean. The source of that ocean is Ali ibn Abi Talib. And Amir al-Mu'mineen, the speech of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, they are coming from a very, very special place. Ali ibn Abi Talib is an individual who had reached the very zenith of spirituality. And he is the most celebrated or consecrated person in Islam after Rasulullah. And this is from both Sunni and Shia sources, that the position of Ali ibn Abi Talib in terms of his piety and his spiritual knowledge is second to none after Rasulullah. And that's why Rasulullah said, Ana Madinatul Ilm wa Aliyun Babuha. I am the city of knowledge, and Ali is its door, Ali is its gate. So this work, although it is has been compiled for its literary value, has great spiritual and ethical depth. And it's not proper when one wants to study such a work to just dive in, because if we go in without any guide, just like when we, for example, when you are to extract something from a cave, the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, had said that the the treasures of spirituality, I'm paraphrasing here, the treasures of the soul are extracted out like the treasures of the earth. So if you are to go into a cave, if you are to go into the earth and are looking for these treasures, it is very beneficial to have a guide. And for us, inshallah, in our short journey, Shaykh Mutahhari will be that guide. The late Ayatollah Murtudha Mutahhari is a very well-known and renowned Islamic scholar. He was a theologian, a mystic, a philosopher, a historian, amongst many other things. He was a mujtahid. He had an expertise in a wide array of Islamic sciences. There are more than 200 works that he had written in his lifetime. He wrote on social affairs, philosophy, theology, Quranic tafsir, Nahjul Balagha, and many, many other subjects. And his influence on Iran and Muslims in general is quite profound, and his position has been cemented in history. And he was known for his great piety and wisdom. And the late Shaykh Mutahhari also had another gift, which was mentioned by his teachers, like Imam Khomeini and the late Allama Tabatabai. The late Shaheed had a gift of being able to explain complicated subjects in a simplified manner. And this was mostly evident in his writings and lectures on complicated subjects within philosophy. But it was also the same. He had a very good mind when it came to organizing information and classifying it and explaining it in a way that makes generally complicated matters simple for those who had the benefit of learning from him. So he compiled this work, Glimpses of Nahjul Balagha, to be an overview of Nahjul Balagha, to go over some of the themes of Nahjul Balagha, and to organize a summary of Nahjul Balagha. And he did this in 7 parts. So in the first part, he discusses some of the main characteristics of Nahjul Balagha and Imam Ali alayhi salam's eloquence in general. In the second part, he discusses theological and metaphysical concepts that are expounded in Nahjul Balagha. In the third part, he goes through some of the aspects of ibadah, worship, that is expanded in Nahjul Balagha. In the fourth part, he goes through some of the aspects of Islamic governance and social justice, which is a primary theme in Nahjul Balagha. And the fifth, he deals with the issue of Khilafah and the status of the Ahlul Bayt through Nahjul Balagha. And the sixth and the seventh portion are dedicated to ethical teachings and the concept of zuhd, asceticism, and the meaning of dunya and akhirah. And so in these 7 portions, the late Shaheed has given a very good outline of Nahjul Balagha, and in each section he cites portions of different sermons, sayings, and letters of the Emir. And inshallah, our goal is to try and go through these sections, if time permitting, and be able to get a good grasp of Nahjul Balagha. Why is it important to study Nahjul Balagha? Nahjul Balagha is one of the most recognized, if not the most recognized, collection of sayings attributed to the Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali bin Abu Talib. The status of this collection in the eyes of the followers of the school of Ahlul Bayt is that its speech is secondary only to the Quran, and that it is like a type of revelation. And the things which are gained from studying Nahjul Balagha, the benefits for the person who studies Nahjul Balagha are deep and they are profound. Even outside of the school of Ahlul Bayt, amongst our brethren, amongst the Ahlul Sunnah, there have been a large number of commentaries written on Nahjul Balagha, and the status of this work of Nahjul Balagha, its literary and spiritual excellence has been noted by many notable Sunni scholars. And inshallah, we will talk or go through some of that, following through with the summary provided by Shaykh Murtudha. Now, before beginning on the first section, I believe it is important to recite a Fatiha for the late Shaykh Mutahhari. And this is an ethical practice that is sometimes forgotten, but really should be implemented. When we want to gain benefit from something, we should always give the respect due to those who came before us and paved a path for us. And this is not unlike how we are supposed to honor our parents. And these individuals who came before us and have given us an inheritance, whatever that inheritance may be, and in this case, it is an inheritance of knowledge and wisdom, we should respect them and show them the proper etiquette. And that's why it's important to pray for them, recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for them, recite salawat for them, or even give sadaqah for them, and then ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts so that we can benefit from their works. And in this case, we have in front of us a book written by one of the most premier scholars of the last century, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted with martyrdom. And inshallah, perhaps another time we can talk more about the life of the late Shaheed and how he obtained that martyrdom. But inshallah, now I would just like to recite the Surah Al-Fatiha and 3 times Qul Huwallahu Ahad for the soul of Shaykh Murtudha Mutahhari before we begin. So inshallah, I'm just going to speak about some of the things that he has in part 1 in his introduction. And I think what will happen after that is I will open for question and answer, and then request that everyone take the time to actually read through the entirety of part 1. And then the next session, we can go a little bit more in depth into the section. So to introduce this work, the late Shaheed spoke about how growing up, he didn't have a real relationship with Nahjul Balagha, and that he was familiar with the book of Nahjul Balagha. He had read portions of it or perhaps the entirety of it, but he didn't go into depth with Nahjul Balagha. And he said, maybe you have come across a situation, or maybe not, where you have someone who lives near you in your street, they're in your neighborhood, they've lived there for years. You see them habitually, you see them all the time, and they've just become normal to you. And it's just somebody that you always see and you don't think twice about them. They have become very familiar. And you only know the surface level of this person. But then an incident happens where you begin to actually get to know such a person. And you find that you had missed an opportunity for so many years to get to know somebody who had a great depth to them, a person of great value, who has great knowledge and great wisdom, and they've always had it. You were just blind to it, and you didn't look at it with a proper lens. And he said, my experience with Nahjul Balagha is similar to this analogy. And it wasn't until he said that I had, well, actually, he gives one example before he speaks about the scholar that he met in Isfahan. He said that the late Shaykh Muhammad Abdu, who was the Mufti of Egypt from Ahl Sunnah, and he was the Mufti of Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar is a very, very old, probably the oldest Islamic school in the world, continuously running Islamic school in the world. And the Zahra was named after, Al-Azhar was named after Zahra, as Fatima al-Zahra. And it was founded during a period when Ismaili Shias had controlled Egypt many centuries ago. But in any case, Muhammad Abdu, a very famous scholar of Al-Azhar, who held the position of Shaykh al-Azhar, and the Mufti, or the Grand Sheikh of the country of Egypt, had published a volume, a version of Nahjul Balagha. He had taken a version of Nahjul Balagha and did some editing and prepared it for publication in Egypt. And upon going through it, he said himself that he was unfamiliar with the work before he started going through this editing process. And as he became familiar with Nahjul Balagha, a whole new world opened for him. And he had been blind to all the beautiful benefit and spiritual lessons and literary beauty that was contained in Nahjul Balagha. And he became very excited to have this book published and sent out to the entire Muslim Arab world. And he said that until he looked in this work, he had never seen this type of knowledge ever. And he had been struck with complete amazement. And in fact, there have been other sheikhs of Al-Azhar who have made incredible statements about Nahjul Balagha. One of them had said that the Nahjul Balagha is between the speech of God and the speech of man. The Quran, revelation, is the speech of God, and the speech of man is what we find in the books of the scholars and the authors. But he said that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abu Talib's words are above that of man and below that of God. So the late Shaheed said that one time on a trip to Isfahan, he met a very pious scholar, Alim al-Rabbani. And this is actually an indication or a reference to a hadith of Imam Ali alayhi salam, where he says that amongst the people there is Alim al-Rabbani, the great scholar who nurtures the people and raises them and takes them and makes them mature. And amongst the people, there are those who learn from such a scholar, and then there's the rest of humanity who are not benefiting at all. So he said this scholar was Alim al-Rabbani, a great, great alim who had many, many traits, and he was the Friday prayer leader in the city of Isfahan. And his name was Haj Mirza Ali Agha Shirazi Isfahani. And the late Mutahhari said he was a sanctified man of God, a man of hikmah, of wisdom, a man of truth, and a man of piety, a man of zuhd, that is abstainment from the world, and that this great scholar had a great knowledge of Nahjul Balagha. And when he spoke about Nahjul Balagha, he brought the words alive. And he said that when the Shaykh Mutahhari said that when I began to hear him explain different aspects of Nahjul Balagha, it was as if I had heard them for the first time. And it was bringing a aliveness to my soul. And this is something that happens when you, if ever you get the chance to come across a scholar who is purified, a person who is purified, and they are speaking from their soul, and they have reached a place in spirituality where they have eliminated their ego, and they've become a sincere servant of God, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls them in Quran mukhlas, a mukhlas person, who shaitan has no part in them. And for those who are not sincere, as God says, shaitan can overtake them, and they're subject to shaitanic inspiration, but the mukhlas person is not. And when you are ever granted the blessing of crossing paths with such a person, when they teach and when they speak, their words become like a light that enters into the heart and brings a person alive. And it has a very profound impact. So the late Shaheed was saying that he had such an impact, or he felt such an impact from Haj Mirza Shirazi Isfahani. And when he began to learn Nahjul Balagha from him, it brought a new perspective, and it brought Nahjul Balagha alive to him. Then he begins to speak about the position of Nahjul Balagha in the eyes of the present day Islamic society. And he said that is that some parts, what is interesting, the late Shaheed says that there are portions of Nahjul Balagha that at his time, and this book was written, I believe, in the 1950s or perhaps 1960s. So he said in his time, there are aspects of Nahjul Balagha that were brought alive to the society, not by followers of Ahlul Bayt, and not even by Muslims of other schools of thought, but there were statements and sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam that were brought to the society's attention by those who were outside of Islam, by communists, by non-Muslims, and even by atheists, by many people who were able to find great wisdom in the sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, especially when it came to issues of governance and social justice. And that these were being expressed and propagated through the society, not even by Muslims. And he said this is something that was quite surprising. And this is something that was taking place at his time. So then Shaykh Mutahhari begins to talk a little bit about the literary marvel that is Nahjul Balagha, and what some of the different scholars have said about the literary content of Nahjul Balagha, the speech of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He speaks about the compiler of Nahjul Balagha, who was a Sharif al-Radi, Sayyid Sharif al-Radi. And inshallah, when you guys have a chance to read through this, we'll talk a little bit more about him and the compilation of Nahjul Balagha in depth, and about some of the different comments that great scholars and men of literature have made about Nahjul Balagha. He speaks about some of the characteristics within Nahjul Balagha, and then he speaks about the varying problems which are expanded in Nahjul Balagha, and the effect of Imam Ali alayhi salam's words and his oratory ability. This is an interesting portion, and I want to just speak briefly about that, the power of Imam Ali alayhi salam's words. And just kind of similar to what we said, how when people come and cross paths with these scholars who are alim al-Rabbani, and the effect it has on their soul. To give an example, aside from Amir al-Mu'mineen, one of the great teachers of the house of Najaf was the late Sayyid Ali Qadi Tabatabai, who was a scholar of profound spirituality and knowledge. And some of his students you may be familiar with, such as the late Imam Khou'i, the late Ayatollah Muhammad Taqi Bahjat, the late Allama Tabatabai, and many others, great Muraja and thinkers. What they say about Sayyid Ali Qadi was a man of exceptional piety. When he would speak, his speech would, mesmerize may not be the correct word, because mesmerize can have a negative connotation. But it would essentially capture people's attention in such a manner that they felt absolutely compelled to listen. And he would speak slowly, but very powerfully. And they mentioned that one time he had come to give them a lesson. And the entire lesson was just one sentence. So that the late Sayyid took his seat and he looked at all his students. And again, these are Maraja, these are not regular students. And he looked at all of them and he just said to them, don't be satisfied with your condition. That is, meaning that don't be satisfied with your spiritual condition, always look for more. But they said that the Sayyid had said it in such a manner, and his gaze, his presence, everything about him was so powerful. They said that's all he said, and he looked at them, and they said that everyone in the class began to weep and cry because the words affected them so profoundly, and that this crying lasted for the entirety of the lesson, and that's all that the lesson entailed. And Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam his power of speech was even beyond this. So that what the late Shaheed compiles in this short section is some of the mentions that have been mentioned from different companions and what has been written in the books of history about how powerful the speech of Imam Ali alayhi salam was. For example, there was a companion named Hamman ibn Shurayh. And this companion was a man who had a deep, deep love for Allah and Ahlul Bayt. And he had inside him a great spiritual fire. He was burning with piety and eagerness to learn more about Allah. He requested Imam Ali alayhi salam to describe the qualities of the pious people and the God-fearing people and give him a description. Imam Ali alayhi salam was concerned because he feared for this man's physical state. If he knew that if he were to describe to him, it may affect him in a very strong manner. So Imam Ali salam evaded his request. But he was persistent. He would always ask. He kept asking. So finally, Imam Ali salam began a sermon, which is a very famous sermon. It's called the Sermon of the Muttaqeen, where Imam Ali salam describes the Muttaqi people. Imam Ali's words were so powerful that by the end of this sermon, Hamman ibn Shurayh died. His soul had left his body. And there are many, many other instances like this. Some that the late Shaheed had mentioned, and some that he had not. I remember in a hadith that I don't remember if Shaykh Mutahhari mentioned this, but in a hadith, they said the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam were the people who had interacted with Imam Ali. They said his presence was so powerful and so drawing, and when he would speak, we were filled with awe and fear and love all at the same time. It was as if we were speaking with a very, very kind, loving man, and at the same time, it was like we were in the room with a ferocious lion. And this was the effect of the speech of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So I'm going to end here and allow for questions, comments, inshallah. And then, as I said, for the next session, if anyone who wishes to, can read the full first portion in advance, and then we can, have, inshallah, have a better discussion. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So if anyone has any questions or comments, any feedback, you can ask those now or put them into the chat room. And I'm very much open to constructive criticism if people felt that the book is not beneficial or had feedback on the presentation style or the style of these discussions. You're more than welcome to voice your opinion or concern. The goal here is for all of us to share ideas and to benefit I'm not an expert in Nahjul Balagha by any means. I'm just here to help facilitate the discussion.
I wrote it in the chat, Brother Sarmad, but maybe we could get like a quick summary of the contents of Nahjul Balagha, as well as, you know, we're young students and we're very busy, so how we can, you know, study Nahjul Balagha in a way that kind of does it justice, and how it can help us in our day-to-day life.
Absolutely. Well, in the beginning, I think I may have answered that question, but I will try again. So Nahjul Balagha is a grouping of sermons and letters and short sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And they cover varying subjects. So they cover metaphysics. Metaphysics is the understanding of the world of malakut. Malakut being the semi-immaterial and immaterial realm, the realm of angels, so on and so forth. The other aspects of Nahjul Balagha cover Tawheed and very profound discussions on Tawheed. Nahjul Balagha also talks about the creation of man and the creation of the universe. Nahjul Balagha also covers historical discussions where Imam Ali Islam spoke about varying historical incidents that took place during the Prophet's time and in his time. Nahjul Balagha contains ethical lessons as well as social justice and governance lessons. The book that I selected I believe is a very appropriate approach to learning from Nahjul Balagha, and that is because Nahjul Balagha is quite vast and the material is dense. And what the author of this book, Shaykh Mutahhari, has done is broken up Nahjul Balagha, a summary of Nahjul Balagha with particular sections, into 7 discussions. And each section in these discussions are relatively short reads. They can be read in under an hour. And I believe this is the best place to start, in my humble opinion, because what he has done is he has categorized the subject matter of Nahjul Balagha into these 7 sections and summarizes them, gives excellent commentary, and has selected specific portions of sermons, sayings, and letters to talk about. And I think this gives a person a great overview of Nahjul Balagha, a means to traverse Nahjul Balagha, because it's a very difficult book to traverse. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. That clarified everything.
If there aren't any more questions, then maybe we can end with a short dua.
Inshallah. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma inni as'aluka mujibata rahmatik wa aza'ama maghfiratik wa najata min an-nar min kulli baliya wal fawzata bi jannati ar-ridwan fi dar as-salam wa jawar nabiyyak Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi as-salam. Allahumma ma bana min ni'matin famink. La ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. thank you all for joining us, inshallah. And if you do have questions or comments, I'm sure there are other means out throughout the week that you can send those. And inshallah, the next session, I believe, is in 2 weeks. So we'll continue from there.
Yes, inshallah. We have next week we're gonna have Dua Kamel, and then the week after that we will continue with the Nahjul Balagha series.
Inshallah.
And before everyone goes, for all the students that are joining, please be sure to sign in the sign-in form that I sent in the chat. And we will be sending out this recording, inshallah, for anyone who wasn't able to make it, or in case you guys came in a little late. So this will be available for you guys to see after, inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, thank you all. Have a wonderful night, and please keep us in